Some doors are built to keep danger out, but the cruelest ones are the doors that never let kindness in. Rain swept across the wrought iron gates of the Crawford estate like silver threads under the pale glow of midnight lamps, each gust of wind carrying the scent of wet cedar and fresh earth through the sprawling property that overlooked the Hudson River. Behind those gates stood Nathaniel Crawford, a 37-year-old billionaire whose name appeared on magazine covers almost as often as it did on the stock market. People admired his brilliance, envied his empire, and feared the silence that followed whenever he entered a room. To the world, he was a visionary. To those who worked for him, he was a man whose heart had been replaced by schedules, contracts, and impossible standards. The mansion reflected its owner perfectly. Every polished marble floor gleamed without a single mark. Every painting hung in flawless alignment. Every crystal chandelier illuminated elegance without warmth. Even the fireplaces seemed to burn with discipline instead of comfort. Nothing inside the estate existed without purpose, and neither did the people Nathan allowed to remain within its walls. At exactly 9:12 p.m., the security monitor beside the entrance chimed. Nathan barely looked up from the financial reports spread across the walnut desk in his private library. His longtime butler, Arthur Whitmore, quietly approached with a tablet in his hands. "Sir," he said carefully, "there's someone at the front gate asking to see you." Nathan's eyes never left the documents. "I don't take unannounced visitors." Arthur hesitated. "She says she has nowhere else to go." Nathan finally lifted his gaze, revealing steel blue eyes that had long forgotten how to soften. "Neither does half the city. Send her away." Arthur nodded, though something in his expression lingered as he walked toward the front entrance. Moments later, Nathan happened to glance through the towering window overlooking the driveway. Beyond the rain, barely visible beneath the estate's stone archway, stood a young black woman no older than 24. Her navy jacket was soaked from the storm, her curls damp against her face, and a worn backpack rested on one shoulder as though it carried everything she owned. She didn't pound on the gate. She didn't beg the guards. She simply stood there with quiet dignity, waiting for someone to hear her. Arthur opened the smaller service gate just enough to speak with her. Nathan couldn't hear their words, but he saw the young woman gently shake her head before taking one careful step forward. Then, through the silence of the rain, her voice reached farther than either of them expected. "Please let me stay. I won't let you down." The words were soft, almost fragile, yet they carried a strength that refused to collapse beneath desperation. Nathan walked toward the entrance with measured steps until he stood only a few feet away, separated from her by black iron bars that looked more like the walls around his own heart than the boundary of his property. He studied her without sympathy, noticing the inexpensive sneakers, the weathered backpack, and the exhaustion hidden behind determined brown eyes. "Why this house?" he asked coldly. The young woman swallowed before answering. "Because everyone told me that if I worked harder than anyone else, someone would eventually give me one chance." Nathan's expression never changed. "You were given bad advice." Arthur looked between them, silently hoping the conversation would continue. Instead, Nathan reached for the gate control mounted beside the stone pillar. The heavy iron doors began to close with a slow mechanical hum. The young woman lowered her eyes, not in defeat but in acceptance, as if disappointment had become a familiar companion long before this rainy night. Nathan turned away without another word, convinced he had ended a meaningless interruption. He never noticed that Arthur remained standing beneath the rain, watching the young woman refuse to leave, because sometimes the people willing to wait outside the longest are the very ones destined to change everything waiting inside. Morning arrived wrapped in pale autumn sunlight that filtered through the towering maple trees surrounding Crawford Estate, washing away every trace of the previous night's storm except for the puddles scattered across the long stone driveway. Nathaniel Crawford began every morning exactly the same way. At 6 o'clock, he reviewed international market reports while drinking black coffee with no sugar. At 6:30, he met virtually with executives in London. At 7, he walked through the Eastern Garden before entering the main office inside the mansion. Precision was the foundation of everything he built, and routine left no room for surprises. Yet as he stepped onto the front terrace that morning, one unexpected sight interrupted the order of his carefully measured world. The young woman was still there. She sat quietly beneath the covered stone entrance beside the outer gate, her backpack resting neatly beside her feet. Her clothes had dried beneath the shelter, although faint wrinkles remained, and she held a small paperback novel in both hands as though the passing hours meant nothing at all. She was not sleeping. She was not complaining. She was reading. Nathan frowned almost imperceptibly before continuing toward the garage where his driver already waited beside the sedan. Arthur followed several steps behind. "She never left?" Nathan asked without slowing his pace. "No, sir," Arthur answered gently. She thanked the night guard for allowing her to remain under the roof during the rain. She refused food until this morning because she said the guards should eat first. She even helped gather fallen branches before sunrise. Nathan looked through the windshield toward the distant gate once more. "That changes nothing." Arthur remained silent for a moment before speaking again. "Her name is Amara Brooks. She has experience caring for elderly patients, housekeeping, and administrative work. I verified every reference myself before breakfast." Nathan turned his attention back to the schedule displayed on his tablet. "I did not ask for a background report." "No, sir. I believed you might eventually." Nathan did not answer. During the drive downtown, board meetings, investment negotiations, and legal documents quickly occupied his thoughts. Yet every so often the image of the quiet young woman, sitting beneath the gate, slipped unexpectedly into his mind. She had not shouted. She had not demanded sympathy. She had simply waited with a patience he could not understand. Late that afternoon, Nathan returned to discover unusual activity inside the mansion. Two housekeepers hurried through the west hallway while Arthur coordinated deliveries with visible concern. "What happened?" Nathan asked. Arthur folded the clipboard in his hands. "Margaret called this morning. Her husband suffered a heart attack. She flew to Ohio immediately." Nathan recognized the name. Margaret had supervised the household staff for nearly 18 years. "How long will she be gone?" "The doctors believe several weeks, perhaps longer." Nathan's jaw tightened. The annual Crawford Foundation Gala would be held in only 4 days. Hundreds of guests, investors, and journalists would soon fill the estate. Replacing someone with Margaret's experience on such short notice bordered on impossible. Arthur hesitated before offering the thought that had clearly occupied him all day. "Sir, perhaps there is another solution." Nathan already knew where the conversation was heading. "No, she only needs 3 days." Arthur's voice remained calm and respectful. "If she fails, she leaves without complaint. If she succeeds, the house remains fully prepared for the gala while we continue searching for permanent staff." Nathan stared through the library window toward the front gate where Amara remained quietly seated beneath the fading afternoon light. She was now helping one of the gardeners gather empty flower pots that had tipped over during the storm. Nobody had asked her to do it. She simply noticed something needed to be done. Nathan slowly exhaled before speaking in the same measured tone that had decided billion-dollar negotiations. 3 days, he said. No special treatment. No exceptions. One mistake, and she walks away. Arthur smiled almost invisibly before nodding. "I will inform Miss Brooks immediately." Nathan turned back toward his office, convinced he had merely solved a staffing problem, never imagining that the 72 hours he had just granted would quietly begin dismantling the walls he had spent an entire lifetime building. The first morning of Amara Brooks's 72-hour trial began before sunrise, long before the mansion awakened to its usual rhythm of polished efficiency. While the eastern sky still carried soft shades of blue and silver, she quietly tied her hair back, borrowed a simple housekeeping apron from the laundry room, and studied the handwritten schedule Margaret had left behind. Every page was filled with careful notes in elegant cursive, documenting not only tasks but also the preferences of every person who lived or worked inside Crawford Estate. Arthur noticed her reading every line twice before touching a single assignment. "Most people try to impress by working fast," he observed kindly. Amara smiled without looking up. "I would rather understand before I move." Arthur nodded with quiet approval and walked away without another word. By 7 o'clock, the breakfast room gleamed beneath the morning light. The silverware reflected the crystal chandelier without a single fingerprint. Fresh flowers stood precisely where they belonged, and the scent of warm cinnamon rolls drifted gently from the kitchen. Nathan entered exactly on schedule, barely acknowledging anyone as he reviewed financial updates on his tablet. His coffee arrived precisely as expected. His breakfast appeared exactly on time. Nothing felt different, which was precisely how he preferred it. He never asked who had arranged everything because excellence, in his mind, was simply the minimum standard. Throughout the day, Amara moved almost invisibly through the estate. She helped the gardeners carry heavy pots into the greenhouse before the afternoon wind arrived. She reorganized the pantry after noticing supplies had been placed without any clear system. When one of the younger kitchen assistants accidentally shattered a serving platter, panic spread across the room. Everyone knew the imported china had been part of a rare collection. Before anyone could blame the frightened assistant, Amara quietly knelt beside the broken pieces, reassuring the young woman that accidents did not define character. Together they carefully cleaned every fragment before anyone else entered the kitchen. The incident never reached Nathan's ears because there was nothing left to discover. During lunch, Arthur found Amara sitting alone on a small wooden bench near the employee garden, eating a homemade peanut butter sandwich wrapped neatly in wax paper. "The staff dining room is open," he reminded her. She smiled warmly. "This is more than enough. I like watching the birds." Arthur noticed she had placed tiny crumbs near the edge of the garden for a pair of sparrows hopping across the grass. It struck him that she seemed to notice small living things everyone else overlooked. As the afternoon continued, subtle changes spread quietly through the mansion. The housekeepers laughed more freely while folding fresh linens. The gardeners found handwritten labels identifying newly planted flowers after someone realized several young plants looked nearly identical. Even the aging golden retriever that belonged to Nathan's late father, a gentle dog named Winston who had refused to leave his favorite corner for weeks, slowly wandered into the kitchen after Amara offered him fresh water and softly called him by name. No grand gestures announced her presence. She simply left every place slightly better than she had found it. Late that evening, Nathan finished a difficult conference call and walked through the west hallway toward his office. He paused almost instinctively. The usually silent corridor carried the gentle sound of someone humming an old gospel hymn while polishing the antique piano that had not been played in years. Hidden by the library doorway, he watched Amara carefully dust each key before closing the lid with remarkable respect, as though the forgotten instrument still deserved kindness, even if nobody listened to its music anymore. She never noticed him standing there. She simply picked up her cleaning cloth and continued toward the next room. Nathan remained still for several seconds after she disappeared around the corner. He told himself she was merely completing assigned duties, nothing more. Yet for the first time in many years, the mansion no longer felt like a perfectly maintained building. Somehow, without asking permission or seeking recognition, one quiet young woman had begun making it feel almost like a home. By the second evening, the 72-hour trial had reached its quiet halfway point. Yet something subtle had begun to shift inside Crawford Estate. The marble halls still echoed with polished professionalism. The crystal chandeliers still scattered golden light across spotless floors, and every clock still chimed with perfect precision. But beneath that familiar order there was an unfamiliar warmth that nobody could quite explain. Nathaniel Crawford noticed it without admitting it. Employees greeted one another with easier smiles. Winston no longer slept alone in the empty library, but wandered freely through the kitchen in search of the young woman, who always remembered to refill his water bowl before anyone else thought about it. Even Arthur seemed to carry a lighter expression as he moved through the estate. Nathan refused to believe one temporary employee could influence an entire household. People simply adjusted to circumstances. That was all. Late that afternoon, Nathan ended a virtual meeting earlier than expected after an investor postponed negotiations. Hoping to review preparations for the upcoming foundation gala, he walked quietly through the service corridor leading toward the staff offices. As he approached the small medical room near the laundry wing, he noticed the door standing slightly open. Curious only because that room was rarely used, he slowed his pace. Inside sat Eleanor Price, one of the oldest housekeepers in the estate. She had worked there for more than 25 years and had become almost invisible to everyone through simple familiarity. Her hands trembled slightly as she struggled to fasten the wrap around her aching wrist. Before Nathan could step inside, he heard another voice. "Please do not rush," Amara said softly. "The dishes can wait another 10 minutes. Nathan remained unseen beside the doorway. Amara carefully placed a reusable ice pack around Eleanor's wrist before wrapping it with practiced gentleness. "It has been hurting for weeks," Eleanor admitted quietly. "I did not want anyone to know. I cannot afford to lose this job before my grandson finishes college." Amara smiled with reassuring calm. "You are not weak because you need help. You have spent years taking care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for a few minutes." She opened a small cloth pouch from her backpack and removed a simple tube of herbal cream. "My grandmother used this whenever arthritis made mornings difficult. It does not solve everything, but it may help." Eleanor's eyes filled with grateful tears. "How much do I owe you?" Amara gently shook her head. "Nothing. My grandmother always said kindness loses its meaning when someone sends you a bill afterward." Nathan stood completely still. He had reviewed thousands of charitable donations through the Crawford Foundation, approved scholarships, funded hospitals, and signed checks larger than most people would earn in a lifetime. Yet somehow the quiet exchange unfolding before him carried a sincerity no financial report had ever measured. There were no cameras, no applause, no expectation of recognition. Amara believed nobody was watching. She simply cared because someone beside her was hurting. Eleanor reached into her apron pocket and offered half of a homemade oatmeal cookie wrapped in a napkin. "It is all I brought for today." Amara accepted it as though it were the finest dessert in New York City. "Then we will share it," she replied with a smile. They each took a small bite while laughing softly about recipes passed down through their families. Nathan quietly stepped away before either woman noticed his presence. As he walked back through the silent hallway, the polished portraits of generations of Crawford ancestors seemed to watch him with unfamiliar questions. For years he had judged people by resumes, credentials, and measurable results because those standards had never failed him in business. Yet none of those measurements explained why one young woman with almost nothing of her own could leave every person around her feeling richer than before. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Nathan realized there might be a form of success that could never be recorded on a balance sheet, and that quiet discovery unsettled him far more than any failed negotiation ever had. The third morning arrived carrying the crisp promise of clear skies, and Crawford Estate awakened with a new sense of urgency as preparations for the foundation gala entered their busiest stage. Delivery trucks rolled through the front gates carrying fresh flowers, fine linens, and carefully packed decorations. Florists measured every arrangement with remarkable precision while caterers inspected the grand ballroom one final time. Staff members hurried from room to room checking lists that seemed to grow longer by the hour. In the middle of the organized rush, Amara Brooks continued moving with the same calm rhythm that had quietly transformed the household over the previous 2 days. She greeted every delivery driver with genuine appreciation, offered cold bottles of water to workers unloading heavy crates beneath the afternoon sun, and somehow remembered every person's name after hearing it only once. Nathaniel Crawford watched the activity from the balcony outside his office, telling himself his attention remained fixed on the preparations rather than the young woman who seemed to carry an unusual sense of peace wherever she walked. Shortly after noon, Arthur approached him with the finalized guest list. "Everything is nearly ready, sir," he reported. Nathan nodded before noticing unexpected movement near the circular driveway below. A luxury florist's truck had stopped abruptly, unable to continue because several large decorative display panels had shifted during transport and blocked the narrow entrance leading toward the ballroom. Workers gathered around the truck, each offering different opinions while precious minutes disappeared. Frustration slowly spread through the crew as they debated the safest way to move the heavy panels without damaging the expensive floral arrangements already secured inside the vehicle. Before Arthur could call additional staff, Amara quietly stepped forward. She studied the situation for only a few moments before asking the driver a simple question. "May I see the loading diagram?" The driver handed her the clipboard with visible surprise. She examined the sketch, walked around the truck once, then smiled politely. "The weight is uneven because these two center supports were loaded first. If we remove the smaller side panels before moving the larger ones, everything will balance naturally." The workers exchanged uncertain glances before following her suggestion. Within minutes, the blockage disappeared without a single damaged flower or broken display. The driver let out a relieved laugh. "That saved us at least an hour." Amara simply handed back the clipboard. "My grandmother always said that sometimes slowing down is the fastest way forward." She returned to polishing silver serving trays before anyone could thank her further. Nathan had witnessed the entire exchange from above. There had been no attempt to impress anyone, no desire for recognition, only practical thinking offered with quiet humility. Later that afternoon, another unexpected problem emerged, when one of the young catering assistants became overwhelmed after realizing she had accidentally misread the seating assignments for dozens of guests. Her hands trembled as she stared at the stack of place cards, convinced she had ruined weeks of planning. Without hesitation, Amara pulled a chair beside her. Together they carefully reorganized every card one by one, checking each name against the master list until every table was correct again. When Arthur arrived expecting disaster, he found two women smiling over neatly arranged seating charts and a fresh pot of coffee. "Everything is finished," Amara said gently. She solved most of it herself. "I only kept her company." The young assistant looked at Amara with grateful eyes but remained silent. Nathan happened to pass through the ballroom just as the final place card was set into position. He noticed something unusual. People no longer looked toward him first whenever a problem appeared. They looked toward one another, confident that together they could solve it. The mansion had always been managed by discipline and perfection, but now it seemed to breathe with something far more enduring. Standing quietly beneath the crystal chandeliers, Nathan found himself asking a question he had never considered before. What if the strongest person in the room was not the one giving the orders, but the one quietly teaching everyone else to believe in themselves? As evening settled over Crawford Estate, the final preparations for the foundation gala moved with quiet confidence. Every hallway reflected warm golden light, every table shimmered beneath polished crystal, and every member of the household carried themselves with a calm sense of purpose that had been missing only days before. Nathaniel Crawford noticed the difference more with each passing hour, although he refused to admit where it had begun. After reviewing the ballroom one final time, he returned to his office expecting another evening filled with contracts and financial forecasts. Instead, Arthur knocked softly on the open door while carrying a thin manila folder. "Sir," he said carefully, "there is something I believe you should see." Nathan looked up from his desk. "What is it?" Arthur placed the folder in front of him. "Miss Brooks never mentioned any of this. I only discovered it while confirming her employment references this afternoon." Nathan opened the folder with little curiosity, expecting routine paperwork. The first document was a letter from a nursing home in Newark praising Amara's compassion while caring for elderly residents during overnight shifts. The second was a scholarship acknowledgement from a community college that she had quietly withdrawn from after only one semester. Attached beside it was a handwritten explanation stating that family responsibilities had made continuing her education impossible. Nathan turned another page and found copies of monthly payment receipts made to a state university in Pennsylvania. The account belonged to a young man named Caleb Brooks. "Her brother?" Nathan asked quietly. Arthur nodded. "Her younger brother. She has been paying his tuition and housing expenses for the past 3 years." Nathan continued reading. There were no luxury purchases, no vacations, no unnecessary spending. Every paycheck from her previous jobs had been divided between rent, medical expenses for her grandmother before she passed away, and Caleb's education. At the bottom of the file rested a recommendation written by the director of the nursing home. One sentence caught Nathan's attention immediately. It read, "Miss Brooks consistently chose extra shifts whenever another employee experienced a family emergency. never asking for recognition and often refusing overtime bonuses because she believed someone else needed them more. Nathan slowly lowered the paper. She never mentioned any of this. Arthur smiled faintly. Some people carry their struggles quietly because they do not wish them to become introductions. Long after Arthur left, Nathan remained alone in the office, staring through the window toward the employee garden. Below, beneath the fading light of sunset, Amara sat on the same wooden bench where she usually spent her brief dinner break. She held an old smartphone in both hands, smiling as she spoke with someone through a video call. Nathan could not hear the conversation, but he watched her expression brighten with genuine joy. A few moments later, she reached into her lunch bag, removed an apple, and laughed while pretending to offer it to the person on the screen. Whoever stood on the other end laughed as well. When the call ended, Amara carefully wrapped the uneaten apple and placed it back into her bag instead of throwing it away. She then picked up a small notebook and quietly reviewed what appeared to be tomorrow's task list before returning to work without complaint. Nathan found himself wondering when he had last smiled during an ordinary conversation with anyone. He could not remember. His calendar had always been full, his achievements undeniable. Yet the simple contentment he had just witnessed seemed strangely distant from the life he had built. For years he had believed success meant never needing anyone, never depending on kindness, never allowing emotions to influence decisions. Yet sitting alone in his silent office, surrounded by accomplishments that suddenly felt heavier than before, he began to understand that Amara Brooks possessed something no amount of wealth had ever guaranteed. She carried hope without certainty, generosity without abundance, and quiet dignity without expecting the world to reward her for it. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the trees, Nathan closed the folder and looked once more toward the garden, unaware that the greatest lesson of his life had never been waiting inside a boardroom but had quietly walked through his front gate carrying nothing more than a worn backpack and an unshakable belief that kindness was always worth giving. The evening of the Crawford Foundation Gala arrived beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars, and the estate glowed like a beacon overlooking the Hudson River. Luxury cars rolled slowly through the front gates, while elegantly dressed guests stepped onto the stone walkway, greeted by soft music drifting from the grand ballroom. Business leaders, philanthropists, journalists, and community partners gathered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, exchanging warm smiles as servers carried silver trays filled with sparkling cider and carefully prepared hors d'oeuvres. Every detail reflected months of preparation, yet Nathaniel Crawford noticed something unexpected before the first speech had even begun. His employees were no longer working with nervous urgency. They moved with quiet confidence, encouraging one another with small smiles and thoughtful gestures. The atmosphere felt different because the people inside it felt different. Nathan found himself searching the room until he finally spotted Amara Brooks near the entrance, helping an elderly guest adjust her shawl before guiding her gently toward her assigned table. Once again, she disappeared before anyone could thank her. Throughout the evening, Nathan observed moments that most people never noticed. When one guest accidentally spilled sparkling water onto the edge of a tablecloth, Amara quietly replaced the linen before anyone felt embarrassed. When a young intern became overwhelmed while coordinating the silent auction displays, Amara calmly helped reorganize the presentation without drawing attention to the mistake. She never interrupted conversations or placed herself in the spotlight. Instead, she seemed to understand that making other people feel comfortable was often the greatest kindness of all. Nathan had built companies by recognizing talent, yet he realized he had almost failed to recognize the rarest quality of all, a person whose presence quietly brought out the best in everyone around her. As the evening continued, Arthur approached Nathan carrying a clipboard. "Everything is ahead of schedule," he said with a satisfied smile. "I have not seen the household operate this smoothly in years." Nathan glanced across the ballroom once more. "Neither have I." Arthur hesitated before speaking again. Her 72 hours ended this afternoon. Nathan remained silent. The words settled heavily between them. According to his own decision, Amara's trial had already expired. There was no obligation to keep her. It had been a temporary arrangement, nothing more. Yet as Nathan looked around the ballroom, he realized removing her would not simply leave an empty position. it would leave an emptiness far more difficult to replace. Later that evening, the foundation honored several local volunteers whose work had strengthened neighborhoods throughout New York. Nathan stood behind the podium preparing to introduce the final award recipient when he noticed one of the elderly guests struggling to climb the small staircase leading toward the stage. Before any staff member could react, Amara quietly stepped forward, offering only her arm and an encouraging smile. She never took control or drew attention to herself. She simply walked beside the woman at a pace that preserved both her balance and her dignity. The audience responded with gentle applause meant for the award recipient. Yet Nathan understood that the quiet act they had just witnessed deserved equal admiration. After the ceremony concluded and guests gradually filled the ballroom once more, Nathan found Amara arranging fresh flowers that had shifted during the celebration. He approached her for the first time without giving an instruction. "You have been working since before sunrise," he said. Amara looked up with the same calm smile she had carried from the beginning. "There is still a little left to finish." Nathan paused before asking, "Do you always put everyone else first?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "Not always. I simply believe that when people feel seen, they remember they matter." Nathan had negotiated billion-dollar agreements with greater confidence than he felt in that quiet moment. For years he had believed leadership meant standing ahead of everyone else. Now he wondered if true leadership might begin by noticing the people walking beside you. As Amara returned to straightening the flowers, Nathan remained standing there a moment longer, realizing that somewhere between a rainy night at the front gate and the light shining across the ballroom, the woman he had once dismissed as a stranger had quietly become the measure by which he was beginning to judge the man he wanted to become. The last guests departed shortly before midnight, leaving Crawford Estate wrapped in a peaceful silence that felt entirely different from the quiet Nathaniel Crawford had known only days earlier. The ballroom still shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, but now the laughter had faded into distant memories while employees carefully returned every chair, every table, and every flower arrangement to its proper place. The gala had exceeded every expectation. Donations had reached record levels, community leaders praised the evening's warmth, and several longtime partners described it as the most welcoming event the Crawford Foundation had ever hosted. Nathan knew the success had not come from elegant decorations or expensive catering alone. It had come from the spirit that had quietly spread through the estate, touching every person who had walked through its doors. Early the next morning, Nathan arrived at headquarters for a private strategy meeting with Victor Langford, the chief executive of one of the country's largest investment firms and a business partner whose influence reached across countless industries. Their companies had spent nearly a year negotiating a partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars. As reports were reviewed and financial projections discussed, Victor unexpectedly leaned back in his chair and smiled with calculated confidence. "Before we finalize the agreement," he said, "there is one small matter." Nathan closed the presentation folder. "Go ahead." Victor folded his hands together. "Several guests noticed a new employee at your gala. The young woman helping your staff." Nathan answered calmly. "Her name is Amara Brooks." Victor nodded. "She seems hardworking, but appearances matter in our world. Investors expect a certain image. Someone with her background does not fit the atmosphere surrounding a company of your size." Nathan remained expressionless. Victor continued speaking as though discussing nothing more important than office furniture. "You are building a global brand. You should surround yourself with polished professionals, not sentimental stories. If you quietly let her go before our public announcement, there will be no unnecessary questions." Silence settled across the conference room. Nathan looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, remembering the rain-soaked young woman standing outside his gates only a few nights earlier. He remembered Winston following her through the kitchen, Eleanor smiling through aching hands, frightened employees finding confidence because someone believed in them, and an entire household discovering kindness without ever being instructed to do so. Finally, he turned back toward Victor. "Tell me something," Nathan said evenly. "Did anyone complain about the gala?" Victor hesitated. "No." "Did any guest receive poor service?" "No." "Did anyone leave dissatisfied?" Victor slowly shook his head. Then the problem is not her qualifications. Nathan's voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable conviction. The problem is that you judged someone without taking the time to know her. Victor's polite smile disappeared. You are risking an extraordinary opportunity over one employee. Nathan stood and quietly closed the proposal folder. No, I am protecting the values that made the opportunity worth pursuing in the first place. The room fell completely silent. Nathan slid the unsigned contract across the polished table. If respecting a person's dignity makes this partnership impossible, then it is the wrong partnership for Crawford Holdings. Without raising his voice or showing anger, he extended his hand in farewell. I wish you success, Mr. Langford, but I will not build the future of my company by asking good people to disappear simply because they do not match someone else's expectations. An hour later, Nathan returned to the estate. He found Amara in the greenhouse trimming wilted leaves from young rose bushes before the morning sun grew too warm. She smiled politely when she saw him approaching, completely unaware of the decision that had just been made. Nathan watched her gently place the healthy plants where they would receive more light, realizing she treated flowers exactly as she treated people. She never asked which ones were considered valuable. She simply helped each one grow where it had been planted. Standing quietly among the roses, Nathan understood that wealth could purchase influence, comfort, and opportunity, but character revealed itself only when success demanded that someone else be sacrificed. And for the first time in his life, choosing compassion had made him feel richer than closing any deal ever could. Several weeks passed, and autumn slowly surrendered to the first gentle signs of winter. The maple trees surrounding Crawford Estate stood quietly beneath pale morning skies while sunlight reflected across the calm surface of the Hudson River. Inside the mansion, life had found a rhythm that no longer depended only on schedules and polished routines. Laughter appeared more often in the kitchen. Winston greeted every sunrise by waiting faithfully outside the greenhouse where Amara Brooks began each morning caring for the gardens before the rest of the household awakened. Eleanor's wrist had grown stronger. The younger employees carried themselves with greater confidence, and Arthur often smiled to himself because the house finally felt alive again. Nathaniel Crawford noticed every change, although he no longer tried to explain them away. One crisp Saturday morning, he asked Arthur to accompany him to the front entrance of the estate. The old butler immediately recognized the place where everything had begun. The black iron gates stood open beneath the clear blue sky, welcoming deliveries, visitors, and neighbors without the cold distance they had once represented. Nathan remained silent for a long moment before speaking. Do you remember the night she stood here? Arthur smiled warmly. I remember thinking the rain would send her away. Nathan slowly nodded. Instead, it washed something away from me. A few minutes later, Amara walked toward the entrance after finishing her work in the gardens, carrying a basket filled with freshly cut white roses that would brighten the dining room. She stopped when she saw Nathan waiting beside the open gate. Did you need me for something? She asked gently. Nathan looked toward the road beyond the estate before turning back to her. There is something I should have said a long time ago. Amara listened quietly. Nathan took a slow breath, no longer speaking as a billionaire addressing an employee but simply as one human being speaking honestly to another. The night you came here, you asked me to let you stay. I believed I was giving you a chance. I was wrong. Amara looked at him with quiet curiosity. Nathan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for perhaps the first time in years. You never needed me to rescue you. You brought your own strength, your own kindness, and your own dignity. It was this house that needed you. It was all of us. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The gentle breeze carried the scent of roses through the open gate, while sunlight danced across the stone pathway where fear and uncertainty had once stood. Nathan reached into his coat pocket and handed Amara a small envelope. Inside was not a bonus check or a temporary contract. It was a permanent employment agreement with full educational benefits and flexible scheduling that would allow her to return to college while continuing to support her brother. At the bottom, beneath his signature, Nathan had added one handwritten sentence. It read, "Never stop becoming the person who reminded us all how to become better." Tears gathered in Amara's eyes, but she smiled with the same quiet grace that had first appeared beneath the rain. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathan gently shook his head. "No, thank you." As the weeks turned into months, the Crawford Foundation quietly expanded its scholarship program for caregivers and first-generation college students, inspired by a story that never appeared in newspapers because it had never been created for publicity. Nathan spent less time measuring success by numbers alone and more time asking how every decision would affect the people behind those numbers. Visitors often remarked that Crawford Estate felt unusually welcoming, though few understood why. Arthur always answered with the same simple smile. A house becomes a home when someone teaches the people inside how to see one another. And whenever Nathan happened to walk past the open front gate, he would pause for just a moment, remembering the young woman who had arrived carrying only a worn backpack and unwavering hope. He would quietly repeat the words that had forever changed his life. "You never let me down." In the end, the greatest fortune either of them discovered was never found in boardrooms, grand estates, or business victories. It was found in the simple truth that kindness offered with dignity has the extraordinary power to open even the strongest closed door.